everyone, Sarah Orr with UT Extension here to talk to you today about soil amendments, watering, and crop rotation in our gardens. So lately I've been getting a lot of questions regarding the topics that we're going to talk about today, so I wanted to address those in a video in case other people had those questions too. So the first thing we're going to talk about is soil amendments, and these are two common questions that I get. The first is, what about eggshells? So a lot of people like to save their eggshells and add them to their garden because eggshells are a great natural source of calcium. That's good for treating things like blossom end rot and to slowly increase the pH in your garden. Now, if you have a major pH deficit, eggshells probably isn't going to get you to where you need to be. But if we're just trying to moderate our pH, eggshells can be a great addition of calcium. But there are some common mistakes that people typically make, and that's what we're going to address in this video. So the common mistake that we see with eggshells is that they're in too large of pieces. So you see I have saved some of my eggshells too, and you see how large these pieces are. That is not very good to be incorporated into the soil, and the reason why is even though those eggshells are jam-packed full of calcium, which is what that soil and those plants need, those pieces are too large to be broken down. So just like with lime, which is our typical source of calcium in garden amendments, it takes a long time for that lime to work. It takes a long time for those eggshells to work. So if we ground those up into teeny tiny pieces, almost like dust, maybe with a coffee grinder or a mortar and pestle, something like that, we'll see a lot better results releasing that calcium into the soil where the plant can uptake it and use it. The other thing we see is people just dumping them out on the ground near their plants. Really incorporate that into the soil. So this is not something you can do after you've planted. This needs to be something you do beforehand. So we see a lot of people adding it to their compost pile that will then later go into their garden. Great way to do that. The other soil amendment that we're going to talk about today is adding sawdust or shavings to your soil as a way to increase the organic matter. That's great. Organic matter is good in soil in our part of the world. We can always add some organic matter to that red clay, and that's going to help with water retention and holding that water where those plants can utilize it. The most common mistake we see with sawdust or with shavings is that people don't compost it before they add it to their garden soil. So if you just take straight sawdust out of your shop or straight shavings out of a bag that you've purchased from a local hardware or farm supply store and add that to your soil, what's going to happen is as that sawdust or those shavings decompose throughout the year, it ties up all of the nitrogen in the soil to the carbon in that sawdust while it's decomposing. So there's no nitrogen available for our plants to grow. That's where we see our biggest problem there. So if you add it to your soil without composting it first, what you'll see is that for about a year, you're going to see weak, spindly plants that just look like they're not doing too good. They look like they're sick. It's because all the nitrogen in the soil has been tied up by that decomposting wood product. The other thing is if you use treated lumber to make that sawdust or those shavings, we can see problems there because what's used to treat that lumber, of course, is going to be detrimental to those plants. The last two things we're going to talk about in our soil amendments, watering, and crop rotation, of course, is going to be watering and crop rotation. So watering our garden plants, of course, is important. Ideally, we want to do frequent, thorough waterings. Okay, we can include fertilization through that water, and that's perfectly fine. We just want to make sure we don't over-fertilize. The common mistakes that we see here is getting the foliage wet. So we want to water the soil around the plants. We don't want to water the actual leaves or the stems because what that does is it increases our chance of disease. We also see people watering in the evenings, and I'm guilty of this as well. It's so much more convenient for me to water my garden in the evening than it is to water in the morning. Well, watering in the morning actually gives that plant time to dry off through the sun and the heat of the day, which decreases our chance that we will see disease pathogens, especially fungal pathogens, versus if we water in the evening. If we water at night, we're much more likely to see fungal pathogens because they lack warm and wet, which we've just created the perfect environment by watering in the evening, especially if we get that foliage wet. We want to be sure that we don't water in the midday sun because sometimes we can see some scorch happen, especially if it's really, really hot. Last and final thing we're going to hit is crop rotation. This is a good idea. Now, do I mean move your garden around your property every year? No, because that may not be feasible. but rotate within that space. If you grew green beans in this corner this year, then grow green beans in the opposite corner next year. By moving the crops around within our garden space, what we see is we are culturally removing and reducing the insect and disease pressure that we see. So a good example of this would be anthracnose on green beans. So anthracnose, basically the only way to control that is to use resistant seed in the first place, but if that's not an option for you, move it in your garden. So if you move it to a separate part of the garden, you've removed the pathogen that was in this soil over here, and you've put your green beans over here away from that pathogen. So a lot of our soil-borne pathogens can be taken out using crop rotation. So that's just a couple of different tips and tricks about soil amendments, watering, and crop rotation in your gardens. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find us on Facebook or call us at 423-623-7531. We're happy to help any way we can. Thanks, guys.